suspect it would be a timetable train. So in a simple routing, the train goes from A through B to C. But out of B, there's a branch that goes to D. So when this train gets to B, goes from A to B, it gathers up cars that are going just to D, sets out the C cars, runs down the branch, comes back, and then continues its run down the main from B to C. My question is, the train starts out with a southbound odd train number. And although I don't have a timetable, I like to put train numbers on my switch list just to kind of lend a little credibility. But at B, if the train goes down a branch, how do they keep track of it? Is it going to get a new southbound odd number? And when it gets to D and comes back, is D a new originating station? Does it come north with a different even number? Because my northbounds are superior in even numbers. And then when it gets back to C, can it go back and retain the original train number to finish the run? Did everybody follow that?
I see some heads nodding, so that's good. I'm going to say, well, it's your railroad, do whatever you want, but I know we've got a lot of prototype experience on the.
I'm trying to make it at least some kind of prototype reasonable. Yeah.
So I see a bunch of people checking in. So Cal, you were first, so go ahead.
Yeah, I've seen examples of this in the Canadian National Employee timetables. And usually what they would do is the train would say it leaves A and it's train number 15. It gets to B. It then becomes say train number 17 going up the branch. Coming back on the branch, it's train 18, but when it gets back to B, it becomes train 15 again. And if you look at the timetable, it actually gives an arrival and a departure time at B for that train with enough gap in there for the train to go up and down the branch. And there's usually a note that says that when train 18 arrives at B, the crew will assume the schedule of train 15 and may proceed without a clearance.
Ah, okay.
All right. So that's...
I've actually got my employee timetable in front of me. I'm just trying to find that in here. Of course, you can't find it when you're talking to people.
That's okay. Steve Prevet, go ahead.
Yeah, it seems to me that would be run as an extra. Of course, if you ran it as an extra, you can, and I do this on one of my branches, is say run from A, extra, what's the right wording here? Form G, engine, whatever, run extra, well, point A to point B to point C and return to point B. Now, I might start a new train order at point B to send it back on the main forward, but these are going to be just the train number is extra number, whichever direction it's going. Now, if there's no other trains on that branch, you're pretty safe in saying, okay, extra run from A to B, go to C, come back to B. Now, if you got other trains that might run on that branch, you may have to break that into several extras, but it's always going to be the extra number is engine number.
I didn't think a train carrying passengers and mail could run as an extra.
Certainly they could. Nothing prevents that. I'm sure some of those mixed freights on where is the famous line in Virginia, the Virginia Creeper. I don't know if anybody would know this, but I highly suspect that probably ran as an extra. I do know that the steam locomotive fan trips in Pennsylvania with a nickel plate 759, I've got pictures of them with white flags on them. So those fan trips are all run as extras.
Oh, okay.
The B&O used the term PX for passenger extra for things like race trains and military movements.
Oh, all right.
All right. Let's
Okay,
see.
so I got options. Good. All right.
I don't see anybody else waving, so okay. Well, I'm glad that was helpful.
Okay, thank you.
All right. A quick addition to my calendar. May 3rd to the 4th, the Midwest NMRA Midwest Regional is going to be held in South Bend, and they're going to be doing some op sessions there. If you open up your chat window, Daniel Brewer has dropped a link in there. So let's see. There's a question in here from a Richard saying, "What topics do the members want to hear about?" So, at least in the DO, we try to do our best. Obviously, we have to publish what we get, but we do generally get a pretty good, I think, a pretty good mix of, how does this work on the prototype versus how do I do this on my layout versus, kind of a mix of things. But we'll take suggestions on there. Richard, whoever Richard is, did you have anything you wanted to say we need to do more of, less of, since you asked the question?
No, it just I realized in the dispatcher office articles that short of soliciting an article from someone, that you publish what people submit, and they're very interesting. I enjoy reading those.
Yeah, we have some very talented authors. I'm very lucky. It makes my job easy. I just kind of keep the cats corralled. That's most of my job. But
when you're reading an article, sometimes you read an article and it leads to further questions, or whereas this Zoom meeting, it can be more interactive, that if there was a presentation and then, okay, what did you mean by that? Or how did that work in real life? Or can you explain this in more detail?
Right.
Type of thing. So the articles in the DO I love, and they're very informative. I thought maybe a Zoom presentation would be something along those lines, but be more interactive. For example, the question 5 minutes ago about how does the train work down the branch and then continue on the main line? What do you do with the train numbers and so forth? So those are good questions. What would you do on every particular railroad did something different?
Sure.
My
Well,
experience,
like I said, we've got a wide variety of engineers here. I know at least a few. So yeah, unfortunately, trying to get. I mean, we have. I just got a rather lengthy email complaining that we have these at 7 o'clock instead of 7 p.m. East or 7 p.m. Pacific time. We unfortunately, and we always have the overseas folks who can't attend because it's too late. But it's like, well, that's why we have YouTube. And given that we got, let's see, last week's has gotten 400 views. The previous one has gotten over 700 views. One of them's over 1,300 now. We're getting a lot of pickup even if people can't attend live, which is great. I mean, it's spreading the operations gospel. So, but yeah, like I said, we'll take whatever, if it's even remotely operations related, and we're including anything like things like JMRI or JMRI Operations Pro, or car card software, or how do you use electronics on your layout. I'm using proto throttles, I'm using decoders, anything that makes that you could remotely tie into operations is welcome. So
I have a question, Eric, if it's
yeah, go ahead.
um Okay, yeah, so I'm Doug from Burnaby in BC. And I'm kind of doing a lot of timetable train order operations. And my one question I have is, do you know if you can use JMRI so that when a track segment lights up being occupied, can you attach an audio ding to that activity? Does anybody know JMRI that well? So it's like a recording, right? So you'd be able to, a dispatcher would get an alert that there was an occupancy somewhere.
I don't know. Group.
It would seem like an obvious thing to have, and
Yeah.
I initially couldn't find it.
Does anybody happen to know that?
Yes, you could do that.
It is possible, is it? Any
Yes,
hints?
you would do it through Logix. You
All
would
through Logix.
you would identify it as a sensor for your occupancy detector, and then you would
Right.
create a Logix, a conditional that would play the audio recording when the sensor became active.
Okay.
Audio recording probably needs to be an MP3 or something that's, obviously computer happy, but
Oh, I would
um,
probably try just a WAV file with a ding,
that would work too. I'm
There's several of those built in that are used for the CTC panel stuff.
Ah,
I dropped a link in the chat. That's the JMRI users group out on groups.io.
okay.
That would probably be a good, they've got 38,000 posts out there. So if you
Yeah,
can't find it, that would probably be a good place for some support, but it sounds like it's definitely doable.
Yeah, should be. Thank you then.
All right. Let's see. Frank Schneider has a question about horn usage.
Yeah, thanks. So I understand forward and backwards, right? You blow your horn 2, 3. But what if I leave the yard and head out on the main with my engine with the rear end first? I assume that forward means the direction the train is going forward. So even though my engine is going in reverse, the train is going forward, so I would blow for forward. Is that correct? And if it is, what happens then when I uncouple and I go to pick up a car and now my engine does it switch to forward and reverse based on my locomotive? Or does it stay based on what the train is? It seems like that would get very confusing pretty quickly. Either way.
I would think it's direction of travel, but I'll leave this to the actual engineers to answer.
Well, on the main line, isn't it timetable direction? If the train is an odd numbered train and it's going west, for example, train number 27, the direction of travel is west. If he has to stop and work, then he would blow 3 times for reverse movement. But
or an east, even though so if the engine is running light down to pick up a car, he's still blowing reverse, even though the front of his engine is going first, based on the fact that his train is going.
Well, switch, it depends. In a yard, if you're switching, my experience has been when you're switching in a yard, first thing you do when you get on the locomotive and you plan out your work with the engineer is what end of the locomotive is that big F on. So if I tell the engineer to take it ahead, he goes forward, which is the end of the engine with the F. If I tell the engineer to back it up, he goes the opposite direction. And however that locomotive is oriented in the yard would depend, if I'm taking ahead, but the engine was backwards, I tell him back it up. But on the main line, you have timetable direction.
Right, I understand that. So timetable direction rules even if my engine is running light down a siding to pick up a car running backwards. I mean, that would, I guess, would make sense. So I'm just trying to confirm that.
Right. The other thing would be how whatever you're simulating, not all the time when we use radios, there's a locomotive engineer whistle, because he would confirm on the radio, like, shove back 20 cars, it'd say shove back 20 cars, and then I'd give him car counts of 10 and 5 and 1. So he wouldn't whistle.
Okay.
So here's a question, and I'm not remotely a real train engineer. Is it that you have a different signal if you're going forward versus back, or is it simply signaling that you are changing direction?
Now, two toots are move in forward, whatever way your train's going.
Okay.
And 3 is back.
Okay.
And then you have all the other ones, the set the brakes and the grade crossing and all the rest of that.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is once my train hits the main line, forward is my timetable direction, reverse is against my timetable direction, and it doesn't matter what direction my engine is pointed, and it doesn't matter if my engine is pointed to is attached to the train or running solo.
Right, because if you're out on the main line, the train dispatcher has authorized you either by signal indication or train orders to operate from point A to point B in whatever direction your timetable says. So let's say from Chicago to Rock Island, Illinois, timetable directions west. I get my clearance card, I get my orders, and I am authorized to operate westbound from Chicago to Rock Island. So if I stop somewhere in the middle, if I'm the local and I'm going to pick up cars at LaSalle or Ottawa, and I got to make a backup move, then regardless of where that F is on that engine, if I got to make a move the other way on the main line or a controlled siding, I am making a reverse move.
Yep.
And
okay.
You got to get authority from the dispatcher to do that unless you're off the main track. And, know, there's 100 rules for that too.
Okay.
And Richard, what railroad were you talking about? Which railroad did you happen to work for?
Well, the railroad I model is not the one I worked for.
Oh, okay.
The Rock Island isn't around anymore.
No.
But that's my railroad downstairs.
Okay. All right. Anything else on that? Anybody else have additional info?
Yeah, I'll say something. If
Go ahead, Brad.
Modeling N&W engines, a lot of them were dual control, so everything is mute.
So whether they're running long hood forward or not, it's okay. All right. How's that work for you, Frank? Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, that's helpful and answers some questions, because when I'm operating, I like to use the horn, and I have run into situations where I've been confused if I should be going forward or back, and I think Richard explained it really well. So thanks.
All righty. Okay. Travers has a question here in the chat. I'll just read it here. I see some folks on the call that have multi-deck layouts. What are the thoughts on building from the top to the bottom versus bottom to top? I will throw out my suggestion. I went top to bottom, simply because I could get underneath the top before I put the bottom in. But with that said, I'll take anybody else's input. Rick Watson says bottom to top. You have.
Right.
Go ahead.
I have a 3-level layout myself, and I learned pretty quick that if you do the bottom first, you get a lot less head injuries when you that way you don't bang your head when there's a layout above you. Well, if you hand lay track, of course, and things like that, right? So
yeah. Or have to get underneath the wire. But sorry, who's talking?
This is Rick.
Yeah, Rick,
I can elaborate on that.
Sure.
Based on my steel benchwork construction, I needed to build the bottom level first because it's structurally required for the main and upper level. So that's why I started on the bottom level.
That makes sense.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, I have a peninsula I'm eventually going to put in, and Brad is up there laughing at me. But that one, it's the same thing as what you just said, Rick. I'm going to have the underlying support. But when I actually build like the switching districts, I will probably work top to bottom once the basic structure is in, just to make it easier to wire and stuff. But
Yeah, the downside of building bottom up is all the debris from the main and upper levels fall down to the bottom,
Yep.
to the lowest level.
Yep.
Yeah, what I was going to add is from some of the conventional wisdom that I've read on is to build the structure from the bottom up, your bench work and up into your track work and that kind of stuff. But then when you get to the scenery level, you go from the top down. You don't want to be doing scenery up above, below, finish scenery below. So you kind of want to do the reverse and do your scenery up above and then work down.
That definitely makes sense.
I think that's reasonable. But yeah, building the physical plant, that's what I think I agree with is bottom up.
Yep. We got a comment in here. Bottom to top is easier, especially if you're using the lower level for staging with very little clearance, less than 12 inches between decks. That seems to make sense. All right.
Thanks, Jim.
I thought I got an emailed question here. Okay, so this was one emailed in from a Hans Schmellenkamp, who I don't see in the chat. So let me just read his email. Dear editor, I model a 1920s city railroad with 3 major areas of the city on the layout. At first, I ran 3 locals, 1 in each area, which seemed to make the op session go too quickly. I then started a whole new plan where I would take 1 car from the yard and exchange it with a car, if there was 1 at a time, at the industry, and continue to do this for every car in the yard, meaning many, many trips from the yard to the industries on the layout. What I was trying to simulate was that an industry would call the yard and tell them that they were ready to pull a car at the industry and or ready to receive a car from the yard if there were any from that industry. My question is this single car method prototypical? If so, who and when did they do this type of ops? I'll open it to the group. This doesn't seem like the way the railroad would do it, but I have nothing to base that on. Go ahead,
Clerks
Steve,
out there?
Oh, I can't
Is he
see.
talking a streetcar system, like something it's a streetcar system, they're just moving a car or 2 at a time? That could possibly be there, but I can't see any railroad want to expend the fuel just to keep running back and forth from the yard.
No, it sounds like, I don't think he's talking like like street cars as in like passenger type. I think he's talking about go fetch 1 car, go fetch another car, back and forth all day. That doesn't seem reasonable. I did hear on the Twin Cities Division podcast, and this is some of the places that do what they call active staging, where there is a request by an industry for X cars. I need 5 grain cars, and I need 3 of this, I need 5 of this, but they all come in a batch and are built onto trains like once per shift or once per day. So I'll throw that out. Hans, that's the Twin Cities Division. That's Minnesota. They do have a podcast. If you, I don't remember what issue or what episode it was, but they have talked about that. Look for active staging. They might have some show notes up. But beyond that, no, I don't think this would be a reasonable way. I think it would be calling for cars, batching them up, and then delivering them. And I see Steve nodding his head. Has anybody heard of this particular method? Or how would, is it batching once a day, once per trick, once per shift more reasonable? I'm just guessing. So
It depends how big the customer is, but the email described what we used to call cherry picking. Go get one car, dig it out, take it out to a customer, come back, get more. We would never do that. You'd even with the 16-hour day, you'd never get done.
Right, because you're not just servicing one industry at a time, right? You're
Right.
hitting a whole, a town or a string of towns, or I could see maybe if you were like an industrial switcher where you had 50 grain cars and you're just moving them around on like an industrial spur, but that
well, there's a way of doing that too. So let's say the customer, you've got 20 cars in the yard and the customer's got a 5-car spot. But you don't want these 20 cars sitting in your yard because it's in the classification yard and you're going to need that track for other things. So if there's 20 cars for that customer, you take them all out and you spot 5 and leave the other 15. Either the customer is a lease track or you've got a storage track or a spur or something. And the cars you actually spot get coded as actually placed. And the cars that don't get spotted, but are there for the customer, go into what's called constructive placement, CP.
Okay.
So the customer, his cars are his, he wants them, but he can't take them all at once. So the demerge starts in the cars that got spotted, and the time starts ticking on the ones that are CP that are out there but can't go into spot.
Okay. All right.
One thing to
go ahead.
consider might be the steel mill. Now, a big steel mill might have a restriction on, like, when the hot metal is poured into those, I forget what they're called, ingot cards or whatever. You'd have to move those. Yeah, you'd have to move those pretty damn fast before they rock up, I would think. But that seems like a very odd, I don't think that's the person asking the question.
No, I think and even in that case, they're going to have a whole string of, I know the ones, it's like the big kettle, with the hot steel on it.
Bottle car.
What is it?
Bottle car.
Bottle car. Yeah. Even then they're going to have a whole string of them and they're going to, so Hans, what I think the group wisdom here is that, no, that's not a thing. It'd be a lot of gas.
Well,
Go ahead, Chuck.
I want to throw in there right away. He talked about that he had one method of operating, but went too quickly, which means it was efficient from an operation standpoint.
That's true.
And so he's looking for a way to make it less efficient. Well, that's diametrically opposed to a railroad as a business. So,
yeah,
I mean, right there in the full philosophy, he's upside down.
Right. Maybe it's a matter of having additional locals, maybe switching, again, I've got no other information about how big these areas are. Is it one single industry? Is it 8 feet worth of layout with a dozen Steve, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking that since he's only asked about his locals, what about the interactions of the through freights? I wonder if this is one of those railroads. In fact, that was the answer I gave to what do you most dislike on an op session. Is the typical op session I've seen more than once is all there are locals. They just circle around the layout, dropping and pick up cars with no thought about, well, how do these things interact with interchanges or interact with through freights?
Yep. How did the cars that are going to local delivery get there in the first place? And once we're picking them up, where do they go? Is it an empty car going back to a yard? Is it a full car going off to some point unknown? Yeah, I think maybe that's something.
You can simulate that by running a transfer job, for example.
Yep.
Or some railroads call them haulers.
Right.
So the job does nothing but make those deliveries to those outlying points and drops the car off for the local or the industry job.
Yep. So in this case, I mean, there's a couple of things that I would throw out just as some ideas is the idea of going and getting one car at a time, probably not prototypical, but I think, having a local that serves industry area A, bringing it back to a yard, and then switching those cars or blocking them on the way out to say, okay, this needs to go to Kansas City, this needs to go to Omaha, even if that's just a train going down a staging track, that gets what Steve was talking about, is that, okay, these cars are on my railroad, but now they're leaving. They're going somewhere. And I think that would add something to it. Is the industry, we don't want to make it unnecessarily hard, but I think there's a lot you could do there with what Richard just suggested, and Steve. So
Can
I think there's
okay, if I could add one more thing in there, I also am blessed with a small layout, switching layout. And so I do a lot of different things to extend it. There was an article recently in the Hobby Press, I think it was in the Craftsman, about how an operator extends, by doing, using a train crew, using the proper stop and a 3-step before hooking up cars and simulating pumping up the air and all those kind of things. So it's not in his email, but I'm wondering if when he had his first model and he's running those locals, if he's doing it the old fashioned switching way, which was just come down, let the KD couplers grab the car and pull away instead of simulating the full railroad action.
Yeah.
If he would go back and visit his original model of operating, but add those extra things into his operating, like I've had to do on my small. I have one town with only 4 spurs and 10 spots. So if I bring in 6 cars and I do it the old modeling way, I'm done in 15 minutes.
Right.
But now when I add in train crew and I add in all those extra steps and all the signaling, blowing, the right horns and all that kind of stuff, I make that same train take an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So he might.
That's a great suggestion.
He might have to go back, look at his first model that's more prototypical and then do it more prototypical.
Right. Add in those steps to sort of slow down the process.
There are related kinds of activities. I recall reading an article. It was not in Railroad Model Craftsman, but somewhere recently of how to extend the time on the operation sessions. And in addition to the ones that have been mentioned so far, there are things like the car has to go to the clean-out track before it can be moved to the next industry.
Yeah.
Or it has pigs in it, and you have to be 2 cars away from the caboose because the smell is going to be awful for the crew. Things like that they have to move things around.
In a modern train, you've got to have a buffer car between the engines and the the oil tankers, for instance. I was listening again, I screwed up the name, I apologize. The Crossing Gate podcast from the Twin Cities division of the NMRA, talking about produce and how some, you need a certain type of car. It's not just, well, any reefer will do. I need this particular type of reefer. I need this particular type of covered hopper. This car has to go to be fumigated because it had something nasty in it. It has to be iced. It has to be, all those little steps that you can do to make it not harder, but more detailed.
I've also done that where I've identified specific door numbers on shippers, and cars have to be spotted a specific door number.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's an easy one, other than just, we'll check them on the track and hope for the best. Spot numbers, specific track numbers. I think those are all great.
And the goal here is to make operations more fun, not necessarily longer. They are longer when you do these things, but it's also more fun.
Right. It's a better simulation, right? It's higher fidelity simulation. Now, if you start making them fill out 9,000 pieces of paper, now we're starting to get it. We've left fun land into, wait a minute, this is drudgery land. I don't want to go to drudgery land, but a higher fidelity simulation. So
yeah, just to note on that, You also have to keep in mind what if you have a regular group of people that operate on your railroad, what they're willing to tolerate.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? You know, you want to tune some of your operations to the crew capability or capacity.
Yeah. I'll throw out another just because I saw some pictures of his layout today. There's a guy up on northern Indiana named Joe Berger who has a huge I think it's Great Northern layout. And when he actually, I don't know where he got it, but he has for the current date that he's simulating, what was the temperature at this particular city? And if it's a certain temperature, I don't remember, it was apples or something the cars have to be iced. But only if that temperature is, if it's too warm, then they have to be iced. And so he'll put up, there's a spot on, I think Gary Evans is nodding. He knows what I'm talking about. There's a spot that says, okay, today's temperature is this. You need to ice or you do not need to ice. Again, it's just these little, blowing the horn correctly, doing that delay of, okay, did you actually check the brake hoses? Did you all do all of those startup steps? And Jim Ramness is suggesting scale coupling speed. Yeah, the running at full speed and just flipping the direction back and forth. No, that's not how we switch. Again, it's your railroad. You do what you want. Adding momentum. Yeah, momentum is one of those, that's a hill I'll die on. I don't like momentum in switch engines. I know some people do, but if I say stop because I've seen a problem, I want it to stop right now. So
it keeps people from hitting the reverse button or the direction button to change direction because momentum slows the train down.
That's one of those religious debates in operations is the momentum on switch engines. So we're going to stray away from that, but it is certainly an option. It's your railroad. Do as you see fit. So
I do want to point out, I actually operated another person's railroad. It was an ON30, so slow speed switching. He had taped down the throttle knob. The only thing you were allowed to do was, as the switch engine, was turn it on, off, forward or back on a Digitrax throttle. But you could not operate the throttle. He had it fixed at a certain speed. Really? Kind of like the time saver.
I've seen some where you can't, or you have to use the brake. Like you can throttle up, like notching it up, but then you actually, I don't remember where it was, but you actually use the buttons to brake, and sort of, better simulating the notches on the throttle, I suppose what it was, but it took a while to get used to. I like having the knob or the, push button on my phone. So
I will say, I did have a BNSF engineer in my railroad and was in Washington State, and he always talked about doing run 8 in the yards.
Yeah, I saw that movie. It didn't end well.
Kicking.
All right.
Well, I'll preach till the cows come home. If you're running a light yard engine, they stop on a dime.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, if you got a hold of a heavy cut of cars, that's another scenario. If you could, how you can regulate your momentum is, up to you, but it just drives me nuts when you got a light engine on somebody's layout and it takes a week to stop it.
Yeah. And the reality is that those, you're talking like a four axle diesel or a switchers. Yeah. So we're adding more momentum than they have in real life. That we may have gone too far. So, okay. Anything else on that topic? Great input from everybody. Hans, I hope you're listening, and feel free to. I'll reply to you in the email, but if you have follow-up questions, feel free to send them in. Appreciate the submission. Okay, there is a comment in the chat from a Doug. Has anyone automated OSing of trains? I have no operators and find phones. Wait, that doesn't make sense. I have no operators and find phones or intercoms slow down train movements, especially if the dispatcher is giving out orders.
He's talking about he has no station operators.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I got it. That makes more sense. Especially if the dispatcher is giving out orders. Ideally, an arrival and departure push button at each siding in which the time is recorded to a logged text file or visible to the dispatcher. Wondering if JMRI might help here. I'll throw out one comment is if you're running detection, OSing kind of becomes less useful. So, you know, if it's something where I'm up, you know, or if you're running signals, right, you follow signal indication until you are at a stop and you're not getting a green, maybe you call into dispatch. But this sounds like probably a timetable train order, so I'll open it up.
Yeah, that's correct. Timetable train order.
Okay. I have never seen that, but
well, if I may,
go ahead. Go, Steve.
I actually have, and I'm sitting at my dispatcher's desk right now. My staging yard is there, but I actually, as a dispatcher, I cheat a bit and can see the railroad, but there's a point I can't see, and I actually have I had a optical sensor for a grade crossing there. So I went, oh, I'm just going to steal that optical sensor and have it buzz a buzzer over at my dispatcher desk. So there's no reason. I'm a cheap engineer. I'm a frugal engineer. That's what it is. I'm actually a civil engineer. I'm a frugal engineer, but I actually do have a little buzzer at my dispatcher station that if a train crosses that grade crossing, I get a buzzer. So I don't see, even without JMRI, I don't see why you couldn't have an optical sensor at the train order signal that would buzz when something crosses it.
Yeah, the trouble is I have 5 sidings, so it'd be nice to know when a train arrives and departs, right?
Yes.
Well, actually, you in an OS, you only get told when the caboose goes by the station.
Yeah.
Or by the point. Now, I also will tell you that a couple of years ago, I was helping a guy in Canada who was also facing small crews, and I had suggested on the OPSIG, well, how could we use cell phones and some automated systems to actually give out the timetable and train orders? And I got very, my posterior got very roasted on that discussion.
Funny.
But I think that is a doable thing. I don't see why one could not. You know, I think Tony Custer has where he gets an automated, you know, a signal that has to be acknowledged. I thought he wrote it up in one of his books.
I'm wondering if I know at least with like the RR Circuits products that I use for the turnout control, you can do a push button and have that. There's basically a little bit, I think it's the logics that says if you get this signal on a push button, do this. Doesn't seem like it'd be that hard to say, okay, reroute that push button to say this is an OS and have that signal something, blink something, do something like that. I haven't done it, but seems like you could do it.
I've thought about that, but I mean, it's simple with Digitrax to have a switch, one of those boards, and you can have a button on the panel, and it would record into JMRI that you push that button, or even automatic detection for that matter. But the trouble is, like, if the dispatcher's not looking and associate that moment with the clock, then that is kind of lost in history as to when it happened.
Yeah,
the idea assuming your operators will push the button. My experience has been people don't OS very well.
And that's right. People don't OS very well. There's that.
Yeah.
Well, thus having an optical sensor or something as a track detector, though, again, you're going to get the whole train or whatever.
Right. Well, that's working like an annunciator.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'd just be nice if it was automatically attached to a time, you know, a fast clock time, of course, but, and then you could look at it later and say, okay, well, then you can develop a schedule, right? Figure out what went wrong or all those kind of nice things that would be nice to know.
I mean, I could imagine, and again, this is way beyond standard JMRI, of having a little tablet app as call it your train register, like you have to sign in on some of the TT and TO boards and essentially say, I am this train, I am going this direction, and I've signed in. Having a little tablet, again, this is this was all custom, but just my software engineer brain running, where essentially they pick what train they are, and that they're here.
Exactly. That's what I've been dreaming for.
Yeah. It doesn't exist. I'm just making stuff up. I'm just saying that, you know, and having little tablets with a, you know, you could make them look like an old style train register, where they have to sign with their finger or some such thing and give you a tip. Oh no, not that.
Well, I will just suggest I actually teach a structured query language course. There are transaction tracking when you change something in a database.
Yeah.
But yes, that requires you've either got Python
yeah.
knowledge or SQL knowledge that so when you're, if you got JMRI, theoretically, if you got in that detection signal, it should be able to log it and say that time. But that would take some, you know, remember, I have a friend who has JMRI. I'm pretty sure that's all Python based. You could theoretically,
Well,
this
JMRI
becomes more of a
is,
job than an adventure, but yes, you could
Yeah.
program in something that would be an event log.
yeah.
Though you
you
still
could-
have the problem, the train number,
Right.
unless you have a transponder. Isn't Digitrax got a transponder nowadays?
Yes, but that's
supposedly.
not really a concern because you're gonna kind of know when a train should arrive.
Yep. Yep. So
Yeah. I mean, and there's plenty of old cell phones kicking around these days too, right? And so they don't have to connect to the network.
Yep.
But
maybe some sort of a cheap tablet that could have some very simple app on it to do that. But
well, and
it's
you know,
not-
JMRI has a built-in clock too, right? The fast clock in there. So there's no reason why, if you were smart.
Yeah. Yeah.
to marry the
JMRI,
two.
it's Java code. So, I mean, it's, you know, that's the J. So maybe doable.
Yeah.
I got,
So at the Texas Express last summer, we were running on the N scale layout there at the convention, and the fast time clocks didn't work. So we ended up being told to use the clocks on our phones. And as an engineer or conductor, we would OS from our phone to the dispatcher. He gave us a phone number. You just texted it in. So there was automatic timestamp on it. And you put in there what train you were and where you were. You had the whole thing on a cell phone.
oh, that's crossing the streams right there. I'm texting from the back of my caboose in the 1920s. You know, hold on, I don't have a cell signal. Let me. That's funny, but absolutely practical though. I mean, it's, you know. All right.
Well, that reminds me of actually maybe an editorial comment or a recommendation with all the different operating sessions that are going on. And I've attended quite a lot of them, and my experience has been that some of the minority scales, people don't sign up for those layouts as much as they do for the HO layout. And when you do that, you're missing a lot of great operating sessions. Some of my most memorable operating sessions have been on minority scales. One that comes to mind was a 3-rail tin plate layout, and it was just loads of fun. And another one was an N scale layout, which was just fantastic modeling, great operations, and very few people signed up for it. It was a shame that they were missing the best layout in that ops weekend.
Yeah, there are some amazing, I know some great O gauge layouts. Ted Schnepp up around Chicago. If you ever get a chance to do that one, that's just, I mean, these trains have some heft. I mean, and then beyond that, you have the 1/8, you know, the 1/8 size ones where if the train derails, you're going to have to put your back into it. So, N gauge ones as well. There's a, I can't remember what his name is down in Kansas City. He's got a huge BN,
Casper.
it's Joe Casper. Yeah. That one, it's like you can have some amazing looking trains because you can put, you know, or especially if they have the big scenery too. His is not such big scenery, but the contrast between the train and the scenery is always impressive in the smaller scales.
Well, I can tell you live steam ops is a blast.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I've gotten to do one up in Michigan. It's a lot of fun. And there's one down in Bloomington here. that runs during our regional events. So there's a comment here. A problem with a simple automatic OS is what Train just OS'd. Yeah, a push button wouldn't do it. It would have to be something smarter than that. So.
Oh, one thing that I did rig up, I forgot about this because I haven't had enough operators to deal with it, but is the security cameras are really cheap these days. And if you have excess cell phones, I do know a railroad that rigged up cameras and towers and had all the tower operators in another room. It was a Pennsy Railroad up in Cleveland, but another feature is to use security cameras.
Yeah, you can also get really cheap. I think it's maybe yay big. It has the built-in camera with a Wi-Fi transmitter, and you can watch it on the computer. So you can kind of go as a mobile camera. I knew somebody who was running those, basically pushing them in front of his trains, and so you had this kind of remote view of your train. But yeah, having the operators see, oh, look, there's the train, and if they can read the number with the cameras are such good quality now, as you said, that would be a cool thing, especially with like a remote, set it up as a remote operator, not even at the layout, maybe. Just watching the trains go by.
Yeah, I'm using a security camera system for my hidden staging, and it's displayed on a common TV. Yeah, that's why I use a security system, because I have the ability to show multiple screens, and then it's its own dedicated Wi-Fi, so the response time's a lot faster.
Yeah. All righty. Well, we're just about out of time. Any last things for the group here? Any questions? Any comments? Anything?
Well, Eric, I sent you an email. I think I have your email. I use Thumbtack on cars on my railroad, and there's another guy who's an N scaler, and especially this is related to the OPSIG discussion about trying to read car numbers. Is I kind of automated in Excel a system using the old Jim Hediger wheel reports.
I'm just pulling that up right now.
Yeah, it's quite the Excel monstrosity, but the idea there with wheel reports, if people aren't familiar with them, is they're the next step up from just pull a car, swap a car. It's okay, this train's going to have 3 box cars and 2 reefers and a tank, and the tank goes here, and one of the box cars go there. It's not car specific, so it's not as realistic as if you had an actual car card, but we're working this one guy's railroad, and it looks pretty promising. And especially versus the old wheel reports, if you put some logic in your Excel spreadsheets that when the staging is connected to what the sorting is in the yard, it should work. It worked pretty good when we first tried it. So I don't know if anybody'd be interested in that, but willing to share that.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to, it probably work best on as an article.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Or I could.
We can put the sheet up somewhere for download. But yeah, if it's something you could talk through, we could do that as a
perhaps.
Session.
I'll volunteer for a session and walk through that spreadsheet. I've got the permission from the guy to share it.
Okay.
But yeah, it is kind of interesting trying to set up operating sessions and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, that whole getting started thing is always the trick. I was just talking with, there is exactly one railroad club here in Indianapolis called the Naptown and White River, and they are just now getting into operations again. And I just saw them today, and I said, well, what are you guys doing so far? And they're like, well, right now we're basically, if there's a car in an industry, we take a car from our train, we put it there, and we pick up the car there. Like, great, that's a start. Let's get people interested in not just circling the layout at Excel speeds, or what Excel speeds could have been. How about ICE speeds? How about that? And especially at a club where you always have the I don't want to do operations crowd, unfortunately. But yeah, so Rich Randall, and Steve Prevet, if you guys take a look at the chat, Steve can probably send you the spreadsheet if you send him his email by private chat. So, all righty. If there's anything else for the group.
Yeah, Rich, I see the email. I'm going to get it out to you here shortly. Rich and I go way back.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And like I said, Steve, we can chat offline and figure out if you have enough time for February, or if we need to push it out to April. So that'd be great.
I can at least talk to it in February.
Oh yeah, that'd
say how it's gone.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Okay. Well, I will thank everybody for showing up. We had I saw 45 people here at one point, so that's outstanding. Again, bring your, right now the schedule, bring up my little schedule here. So, we have another one of these scheduled for the 25th. The open forum is the 25th. I'm going to virtually pencil Steve in for the 11th. That unfortunately, let me look at the calendar here. Steve, that may, I will have to get with you on that particular date. We may have to cancel due to an upcoming anticipated personal tragedy. So, my dad is in the hospital, so we may have to, I don't know what's going to happen. So,
well, sorry to hear that. And I'm sure we all wish you that the best occurs.
Yeah. Well, like I said, just in terms of, what may be those fun events that come after what he's going through. So, the 11th should be fine. I think that will all be done by then. So, beyond that, we have somebody scheduled for March 10th. March 24th, there will be no open forum as I'll be out of town. But beyond that, we'll be doing if we can keep finding presenters. The one good thing, if anybody's working on their MMR or their achievement programs, this does count. We are considered a regional event, and so presenting here gets you 2 points. Just like writing articles for the OPSIG magazine gets you 2 points a page. So if you need some points, it's great for that. I'll sign off whatever you want. So with that, I will thank everybody for attending. And wish you all a good evening. Thanks for coming.
February 11th is the Super Bowl.
Is it really? I thought it was well, then maybe
who the heck cares about the Super Bowl?
Did they move it that late? Really? Well, okay. Well, maybe what we'll do is we'll do the scheduled event for the 25th instead of the 11th. And we'll just do one event in February. So actually the 25th won't work. So maybe it'll be the 18th. We'll kind of split the difference. I forgot that they had moved it so late this year. But yeah, that will cut into our audience. So, okay. We'll figure that out. Watch your OPSIG email for an update. So, all right. Thank you, everybody.